A video of Trump lightly tapping Fed Chairman Jerome Powell recently went viral. The clip showed Trump confronting the Federal Reserve Chairman on the construction site of the renovated Fed building. With that one pat, Powell almost lost his balance. It's clear Trump is getting really anxious. The interest rates are just too high. Some friends have been saying that the high rates are driving them crazy, whether they're trying to buy a car or a house. Others have pointed out that the president can't just replace the Fed chairman whenever he wants. But just a week after that pat, it seemed to have an effect. So what leverage does Trump have over Powell? Will interest rates be coming down soon? Is there hope for homeowners this year? Before we start, please give this video a thumbs up. Your support is my biggest motivation to keep creating content. In a previous video, we talked about two types of interest rates. One is the benchmark rate, which the Federal Reserve controls. Some people have asked if mortgage rates will also drop when the Fed cuts this benchmark rate, and if that will make buying a house cheaper. Let me explain it in a minute. The principle is quite simple. The Fed's benchmark rate is like the main switch for the entire economy. When you flip the switch up, interest rates rise, and the cost of borrowing goes up with it. This immediately makes short-term loans, like car loans, credit cards, and business loans, more expensive. However, mortgages aren't short-term loans, they are long-term. In between the benchmark rate and mortgage rates lies the U.S. Treasury yield. To put it simply, think of the Fed as a chef boiling water. The Fed's interest rate is the knob that controls the size of the flame. The Treasury yield is the temperature of the water as it heats up, and the actual mortgage rate we pay is the final cup of hot water. This is what affects our daily lives. But for Trump as president, he has bigger things to worry about. With his big beautiful bill initiatives passed, the government's deficit has skyrocketed. This means the government has to borrow money from banks. With interest rates so high, every loan is costing a fortune. A tough time for the government means a tough time for Trump. That's why Trump has been putting pressure on Powell, reminding him, "I'm the one who appointed you. You need to get the hint and cut the rates." But Powell won't budge. His reasoning is that the current unemployment rate hasn't crossed the 5% warning line. Besides, the Federal Reserve has legal independence. The president can say whatever he wants, but replacing the chairman is off the table. So, Trump had to find a way to get to Powell personally. And as luck would have it, the Federal Reserve building, which is over 100 years old, was undergoing renovation. This was the perfect opportunity. Trump, having made his fortune in real estate, immediately saw an opening. In architecture school, we have a required course called Building Materials and Construction. The construction industry is one of the biggest polluters affecting our environment. And don't think it's just the dust from outdoor construction sites that's the problem. The worst pollution is often indoors. Many famous historical figures who were said to have died young were later found to have toxic substances from building materials in their bodies. A classic example is asbestos. Asbestos is a mineral fiber that's insulating, strong, and heat-resistant. In early construction, it was used in spray-on insulation and even in flooring materials, especially in older houses in the American Northeast built before the 1970s. Later, architectural science discovered that asbestos fibers are a carcinogen. Europe has banned it completely. While the US hasn't issued a full ban, its use has been heavily restricted since the 70s. When renovating old houses, large amounts of asbestos are often found, and its removal and replacement are extremely expensive. This includes the Federal Reserve headquarters. Built in the 1930s, it's a historic building, which means it inevitably contains asbestos. Because it's a historic landmark, you can't just tear down walls, facades, decorative carvings, and woodwork. You can think of the renovation as being like a surgeon operating on a patient. You have to perform the surgery without making a large incision, ensure the operation is a success, and restore the organ's function. Imagine how difficult that is. From the very beginning, the project's cost was virtually uncontrollable. And don't think uncontrollable means we in the architecture profession are irresponsible or lazy. For example, Some friends who come to me for real estate advice on renovating old houses in the Northeast know that we in the industry expect at least a 10% budget increase. So Trump, with his background in New York real estate, handed Powell a budget sheet and questioned him. The budget was $2.5 billion. How did you end up spending $3.1 billion? Powell, not one to be flustered, put on his glasses and did the math on the spot. He found that Trump had included a previously renovated building in the current project's costs. Of course, Trump knew this. His goal wasn't to argue about the construction budget. He just wanted to make a statement and embarrass Powell on sight. You're the head of the Fed, supposed to be in charge of the economy, and you can't even get this right? Anyone with a bit of office politics experience could see what was happening. The big boss was looking for someone to back him up. And when the leader wants something, there will always be people who can read his mind. Trump's surprise visit to the construction site had already achieved its purpose. A week later, within the Federal Reserve, 3 distinct factions have become crystal clear. With the September interest rate meeting just a month away, these groups will spend the next month trying to influence Powell's decision. Will Trump get his wish for a rate cut in September? In a previous episode about getting more discounts on new homes, a friend asked who really decides on interest rate hikes and cuts in the US. That's an excellent question, and it's the perfect entry point for understanding the 3 main factions within the Fed right now. Let's start with the conclusion. The Federal Reserve is not a one-man show run by Powell. Powell's headquarters is in Washington, D.C., but there are 12 regional Federal Reserve banks across the country. The actual decision is made by a collective vote of the Board of Governors in D.C. and the presidents of the 12 regional banks, who together form the Federal Open Market Committee. The decision-making process is fascinating. The committee has 19 members in total. 7 of them are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. The other 12 are the presidents of the regional Federal Reserve banks. At each meeting, 12 out of the 19 members have voting rights. The remaining 7 can participate and state their views but cannot vote. So Powell is like a chairman of the board. He needs to persuade enough supporters on the committee to pass a decision to raise or lower interest rates. You can see how clever the person who designed this system was. The US president has almost no influence on the decision because each region has its own vested interests, represented by its bank president. The final decision is actually a compromise that balances the interests of the entire country. In short, it's a balanced decision for the overall benefit of the United States. No single person calls the shots. Thank you for listening to this explanation. Some friends have commented before, asking if the US is controlled by a mysterious European family and if the Federal Reserve is just a front for some evil force. That sounds like a Hollywood movie plot, and we all love those. But if you look at the reality of Trump's situation, if the Fed were really a front for some dark power, would Trump dare to show up at a construction site and nearly push Powell over? Would the powers behind him allow that? His goal was to create a rift within the Fed to speed up a split among its 3 factions. So which of these 3 factions will win out? Let's take a look and see which one would have the biggest impact on your life and be most beneficial for the stock and housing markets. The first faction is the doves or the radicals. They advocate for an immediate interest rate cut. Listen to the president and stop dragging your feet, they say. The members representing this view are from the St. Louis and Cleveland Feds. The second faction is the hawks or the conservatives. They insist on seeing clear signs of an economic downturn before they'll even consider cutting rates. Their representatives are from the Atlanta and Las Vegas Feds. Finally, the third faction is the wait-and-see group. They are waiting to see the impact of the tariffs from the first half of the year, some of which haven't even been fully implemented yet, before making a move. This group is represented by the New York and San Francisco Feds. So which camp does Powell belong to? He's actually in the third group, the wait-and-see camp. He's willing to compromise, but he needs a reason. He can't make a move until he sees the data to justify it. But once he sees it, he'll be more aggressive about cutting rates than anyone. Now let's address some questions from you, our friends, based on these three different factions at the Fed. One person asked about buying a primary residence with a budget of under $650,000. They're not very hopeful about a rate cut and are wondering if they should start looking for a house now. They hope to move in before Christmas to avoid the peak season next spring when school starts and prices might be even higher. If the conservative faction at the Fed wins out, they might not cut rates at all by the end of the year. In that case, let's do the math. If the interest rate stays at 6.5% and the total price is $650,000 with a 20% down payment, the loan amount would be $520,000. For a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage at 6.5%, the monthly payment would be around $3,200. If you're still thinking about buying a house now, you shouldn't just be looking at the price. You need to watch the interest rate closely. If the monthly payment is so high that it lowers your quality of life, then I think it's completely unnecessary to buy a house. Let's see what happens if the rate drops to 6%. The monthly payment would be just over $3,100. So the difference between a 6.5% and 6% rate is a little over $100, less than $200 a month. For a primary residence, it's a decision a couple can make at a family meeting. It's not that complicated. You don't need to create a spreadsheet and hold formal meetings like you would for an industrial investment. It's about how much pain the couple can tolerate with the monthly mortgage payment. I've noticed that in many families, the wife makes the final decision. In that case, it's an easy problem to solve. When I'm looking to buy a property, I have a framework in mind before I even talk to a real estate agent. I ask the agent to find me a few properties based on my criteria because I know there's no such thing as a perfect house. But some people have no standards when they're house hunting. They're easily swayed, and if an agent talks them up, they might look at more and more houses and get even more confused. They start to look down on the houses within their budget and find that the ones they like are increasingly expensive. So they procrastinate. Many people did this a few years ago when interest rates were low, and they ended up not buying anything when rates went up. They missed out on the low rates and didn't get a house. If you've been dragging your feet until now and still haven't made up your mind as a couple, then maybe you shouldn't buy. Otherwise, the down payment money is just sitting in the bank, which is a waste. You might as well use that money for something else. Why get so hung up on buying a house? For example, if you were thinking about dollar cost averaging into the S&P 500, you could research some ETFs. The S&P has been rising these past few years. Wouldn't it be better to put that money to work for you? It's definitely better than letting your down payment just sit there. That's why so many people are hoping for the Fed's dovish faction to push for a big rate cut, which would cause the stock market to explode. A friend asked for advice on balancing upgrading their home with investing in the stock market. They believe that if the Big Beautiful Act policies are combined with an interest rate cut, the stock market will take off in the second half of the year. They are considering putting the money they save for a new house into the stock market instead. This is a common question, and it reflects the hope that the dovish faction will succeed in getting an immediate rate cut. However, this is actually a double-edged sword for both the stock and housing markets. Let's talk about the stock market first. Remember the pandemic in 2020? The Fed pushed interest rates to extremely low levels, making the cost of investment and financing almost zero. What was the result? Stock and housing prices both skyrocketed. So we can expect that if the Fed follows the dovish path of rapid rate cuts in September, sectors supported by the Big Beautiful Act, such as technology, manufacturing, defense, and energy, will be the first to benefit. This also includes real estate development because rate cuts will lower the financing costs for builders. But the problem is, a major rate cut is often a sign that the economic fundamentals are in real trouble. Think about the economic crises of 2008 and 2020, marked by soaring unemployment rates. So a rapid rate cut might give the stock market a temporary boost, but if the fundamentals like employment data don't keep up, the market won't be sustainable. Take real estate, for example. I've been talking to friends on the front lines of construction, and many of them have told me that their workers were scared away a while ago. For instance, on one of my projects in California, there's a subcontractor, an old man in his 60s who does exterior work. This man in his 60s is setting up his own scaffolding. I asked him why he doesn't hire a few workers. He said he can't find any. Nobody is looking for work. And look at the big companies. It's very difficult for recent graduates to find jobs. In the past, large companies hired college graduates, frankly, as cheap labor for basic tasks to reduce overall labor costs. This allowed them to pay high salaries to executives and highly skilled professionals. To put it bluntly, college students were used to lower labor costs. But now, even college students are not as cost-effective as artificial intelligence. The current job market, especially for entry-level positions, is very distorted if you ask anyone in HR. So what are recent graduates supposed to do? The employment data is a big unknown. So who can predict what justification the doves will have for cutting rates? Of course, I welcome friends from all fields to share their experiences. Are you facing similar hiring problems in your industry? Are a lot of entry-level jobs being replaced by AI? My understanding is that you shouldn't go all in on either the stock market or real estate. The Fed isn't sure what to do, and even Trump is at a loss. What can you do? I'm sure some people will say that someone in construction and investment like me is too timid to make big money. And I admit it, I am very cautious. Otherwise, if someone in construction told you to be aggressive, take risks, and go all in, would you dare to live in the houses they build? The world needs certain professions to be inherently conservative: architects, doctors, public servants, and those in healthcare. The same goes for real estate investment. The more money they make, the more conservative they become. All right, a friend left a comment asking if the second half of the year, being the off-season, is a better time to enter the market for investment properties. They noted that I've talked a lot about discounts on new homes, and they expect the discounts to be even better in the latter half of the year, making the investment cost more favorable. First of all, most people have a misconception about real estate investing. They think that when house prices are low, you have to enter the market at the perfect time, as if you have a stopwatch and you press it to start buying. That's a joke. The logic for real estate investing is completely different from stock investing. I've said it many times. There's no such thing as bottom fishing in real estate. Real estate investing is about finding valuable properties in high value added locations. We've talked about this principle many times. If you buy a bunch of properties in bad locations that are hard to live in and hard to rent out just because the prices are low, is that really bottom fishing? Isn't that just being a bag holder? Is this concept really that hard to understand? Imagine a community where 20 to 30% of the homes are bought by investors, and you're still trying to compete for an investment property there. To be blunt, that's not a good investment strategy. You'd be better off saving your money in a high-yield CD account and not wasting it. In fact, large institutional investors are currently pulling back. The market perspective and sensitivity of institutional investors are on a completely different level than individual investors. Let's look at this chart. In this chart, we divide U.S. residential real estate investors into 4 categories based on the number of properties they purchase. The first category is those who buy 3 to 9 properties, and they make up the largest group by number of people at 14.71%. The second category is those who buy 10 to 99 properties, ranking second at 10.53%. The third category is those who buy 100 to 999 properties at 2.79%. And the last category is large institutional investors, the so-called house flipping groups, at 2.16%. Which category of investors do you think has the highest immediate impact on the housing market and is most sensitive to market changes? It's definitely the fourth category. Their financing advantages and market analysis tools are far beyond the reach of individual buyers. But do you know who is buying aggressively right now? It's not the large institutional investors at the top, nor is it the small buyers with 3 to 10 properties at the bottom. It's the group in the middle, those who buy 10 to 99 properties, the second largest group. Why? Because the 3 to 9 property group is small scale and inherently risk averse. And the ones at the very top are the savviest of the savvy, the Wall Street types who were aggressively buying up properties in places like Texas and Florida. So the largest groups by number of buyers at both the top and bottom are pulling back. This has opened up investment space. It's not that there are no houses, it's that they've stopped buying, creating an opening. And this is happening just as builders are offering discounts. If you ask around, you'll find that most people who are still buying new investment properties are buying them from builders. Institutions sweep up properties in entire areas to gain market pricing power. If they own all the houses in a community, they can set the price. But with less than 100 properties, you don't have that kind of leverage. So, for those of you who are still thinking about investing and buying up a lot of properties, I would just remind you to ask your real estate agent about the percentage of investment properties in the local area. Then, do your own math and think about why the big institutional investors aren't buying here right now. Why have they pulled back? It's because they believe that short-term market interest rates will not fall. They are in Powell's camp on Wall Street. They are the wait-and-see party, waiting for a better opportunity. This episode is really a session about interest rates, addressing the questions many of you have had recently. Especially since July, as we've entered the second half of the year, I've noticed that many friends have expressed anxiety about buying a home, investing, and life in general. On one hand, people have been waiting for years for Trump to deliver on his promise to lower interest rates. He said he would, but it hasn't happened yet. If interest rates do come down, it would make buying a home more hopeful and ease the pressure of mortgage payments. So people are waiting anxiously. On the other hand, there are those who are hesitant about the stock market. The stock market looks pretty good right now, so should they still buy a house? If house prices drop, maybe they shouldn't. It would be a shame to miss out on the stock market gains by tying up their down payment. I hope everyone can understand the reality of the situation. The Federal Reserve is not an impenetrable fortress, but it's also not something that can be easily manipulated into cutting rates. The wait-and-see faction has its own bottom line. Don't tie your happiness to political struggles because they are both uncontrollable. Powell himself has difficulty controlling the situation, and Trump can't get his way. Why should you worry about it? If you and your spouse have a solid plan to buy a house, then go ahead and execute it. If you've decided not to buy a house and want to invest in the market instead, then maintain a good mindset and let time and compounding do their work. There's no need to be anxious. So what Trump can't solve and what Powell is waiting on, you don't need to lose sleep over. It's summer. It's hot. Get a good night's sleep, and you'll have a much more relaxed day tomorrow. I welcome you to share your thoughts on the September rate cut and any observations you have about hiring and employment in your industry. These are the key indicators for the job market that will influence the September decision. Let's all share information. Thank you for your likes and subscriptions, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next exciting share.